Good afternoon, everyone, and everybody on live streaming. As Angela mentioned, my name is Elisabeth Mungai, and I'm the public health analyst for the long-term care component. And if I could take you back to Angela's definition of surveillance, it's the systematic collection, analysis, interpretation. So for Angela's talk, he talked about how do you collect the data? What do you do to collect it? So now I hope to discuss with you how do you visualize it, how you analyze it, and how you interpret the data. So we will be talking about dataset generation process in NHSN, and then we'll discuss the structure of the analysis output options. And then I'll be discussing the output options for CDI lab ID event, UTI events, and the prevention process measures. So generating data sets in NHSN takes a snapshot of the data and organizes it for analysis, which allows for faster generation of reports. Each user has his or own data set, so the changes you make in your analysis does not affect other users looking at that data. And generating data may take a few minutes, and as it's happening, you can also navigate within the application. So here to generate the data set, here we're looking at the analysis page on NHSN. You click on analysis and then generate data set, highlighted by the red arrow. This will take you to the generate data set page. So the first thing I'd like to point out is NHSN, as a default, generates the data for the 3 most recent calendar years of data. If you have a longer period of time that you are looking at, the first thing you do is to click on the Include All Data Reported to NHSN box. This will include all of the data that you have collected into NHSN. Next, we click on the Generate New. And as you click on this button, a pop-up will appear, and it will tell you that the current data set will be overwritten. And that's okay, because that doesn't mean that the previous data is erased. It means that the new data is added to the previous data that you have. So we click OK on that one. And this is the next page that we see. And this page tells you your progress in the generated data set. And depending on how large your data set is, this may take a few minutes. And as I mentioned previously, you can go and navigate to other sections of NHSN while this is going on. So as I mentioned, since generating data provides a snapshot, it freezes the data set, your data. So any changes that you make in your data, such as if after you generate, if somebody adds new data in your facility, you won't be able to see the new data that has been entered until you generate data sets again. So that's something that we like to remind all of our users, that if you've reviewed data, let's say maybe last month, you come back this month, you have to remember to generate your data sets again if you want to see the data that has been entered in that interval. So after data sets are generated, you are ready to analyze your data in NHSN. So reports are referred to output options, and the output options are organized into folders that will guide you toward the data you wish to analyze. So first, I'll be talking about lab ID events. So here, we're back on the analysis page, and you've generated your data sets. To access your output options, you navigate to the analysis button on the left, and you click on output options highlighted by the red arrow. And as you can see, in the middle section of the page, we see all of the folders that the data is organized, MDRO, CDI module, HAI modules, and the process measures. So to begin with the CDI module, so these folders contain the output options for organisms such as MRSA, MSSA, and C. difficile. These organisms are available for users to analyze once they have data entered for these particular organisms. In this presentation, I will be focusing on the C. difficile lab ID events. So if we click on that, and that's highlighted by the second green arrow, then we click on the CDC-Defined Output, we see two drop-downs, line list and rate tables. So first I'll talk about the line lists. And the line lists are useful because they allow users to view record level data and can help identify issues in data quality, for example. So this is hypothetical data that I've created just to kind of show once you've entered the data, what a summary of it would look like. So this line list table, and for the purpose of this discussion, I've labeled the top column from 1 through 9. So column 1 is the org ID that is generated by the system. Column 2 is the resident ID. Column 3 shows the current date of admission for the resident with a CDI lab ID event. And column 5 shows the event date, which, as you remember, is equal to the specimen collection date. Okay, so column 8 shows the location of the resident at the time of the event. And this column is particularly helpful to see if events are clustering in a particular location. And column 9 shows the transfer from, which is the variable that tells us whether or not a resident has been transferred from an acute care center within the past 4 weeks. I'd also like to guide you towards the bottom of the table, and that's our the section on the bottom. It tells you this section is important to look at because first it tells you the data that is included in your table, and it gives you other information. In this case, we see, you can't read on the bottom, but it says that the data is sorted by the event date location. That's important to know if you're trying to orient yourself and see which, how it's organized. So in this case, column number 5 is how our data is organized. And as I mentioned, column number 8, our location, is an important column since it might be, you might look at that column to see if any of your events are clustering to a particular location. And this example, we see here, we have a few of our events that happen on the 1st of February that are clustered around the general location. Next, I'd like to show you an example of what a rate table would look like once you've entered your data. So when you click on Run in NHSN, you will find that there are about 6 or 7 rate tables. And in the interest of time, I'll only be discussing the long-term care facility incidence CDI rate table. So this table shows the monthly long-term care onset CD incident rates for this particular facility. And like the previous table, the data is summarized by year and month, and that's provided by column 1. And column 2 tells us that the location is fact-wide in. If you remember from previously, Angela mentioned that we enter our data for facility-wide data is what is entered for lab ID events. Column 3 shows us the incident long-term care onset CDI case count for that month based on the CDI events submitted for that month. Column 4 is the num-res days, and that's the resident day, total resident days for that month, and that is what you submitted in the monthly summary or denominator report that you filled out. That is what that data is. Column 5 is the calculated long-term care onset monthly incident rates per 10,000 resident days. And we multiplied the long-term care incident rate by 10,000 to standardize the rate so that a facility can compare its rate over time, even though the total resident days on column 4 will change monthly. So you're able to compare month by month your rates for that facility. Again, I'd like to direct your attention to the legend on the bottom, and it tells us that this table includes the incident rates for the data, and this in this calculation, it includes events that are associated with a recent acute transfer. And this is what Angela mentioned was we called ACLO, the Acute Transfer Long-Term Care Facility Incident events. And we also see on the second line that the recurrent cases are excluded from these calculations. So we're only looking at new events for that month, not recurrent events. So this particular table would be of interest to a nursing home looking at this because it looks at CDI events which have an onset in the nursing home. And if you remember, these events for long-term care onset occurred on or after calendar day 4 in the nursing home. In addition, as I mentioned, the rate excludes the recurrent events. This would help nursing homes monitor their quality improvement. So a high or increasing incident rates would prompt the facility to evaluate more closely their CDI counts, to look at clustering around the location, for example, or risk factors among residents, such as a recent antibiotic use or a recent transfer from an acute care facility. That would give them an idea of the risk factors for their residents that might explain an increase in their rates for CDI. So we're going to quickly move on now to look at UTI events. So now we're back to the analysis page, and we're looking at the second folder, the HAI module, to access our UTI event data. So, and as you can see on the second square, we click on the HAI module and all UTI events. And as you can see, the output options here are organized into line lists and rate tables for all UTI events with a catheter, the CA-SUTI, and UTI events without a catheter. So before discussing the tables, I would like to take some time to discuss some of the metrics for UTI calculations. So first, the CA-SUTI rates that we'll be discussing. The catheter-associated symptomatic UTI rates, and these are calculated by dividing the number of events by the urinary catheter days times 1,000 catheter days. This only includes symptomatic events which develops at the time an indwelling catheter is placed or has been removed 2 days prior to the event, with the day of removal being day 1. Next, the SUTI rate is calculated by dividing the number of non-catheter associated UTI by the number of resident days subtracted from the urinary catheter days times 1,000 catheter days. And here I'd like to note that only SUTIs which are not catheter associated are included, and residents with other urinary devices such as suprapubic catheters are also counted as SUTIs. Next, the urinary catheter utilization ratio. This calculates the proportion of total resident days during which indwelling catheters are used. The indwelling catheter use is necessary for CA-SUTI. Therefore, reducing your facility's catheter utilization rate may lead to a reduced CA-SUTI rates. And finally, the UTI treatment ratio. This compares the number of clinically treated UTIs to the number of UTIs meeting the NHSN surveillance definition. So if we can think about this, when the treatment ratio is greater than 1, that means that more antibiotics were started for UTIs that did not meet the NHSN surveillance condition. And this would be important if you want to look at your antibiotic stewardship, how your facilities are actually using the UTIs and if they're being used appropriately. So back to our analysis page to remind you of how we get to our UTI output options. So we click on the CDC-Defined Outputs, and for this discussion, I'll be looking at the all UTI events at the top, and we'll be looking at one of the incident, the rate tables, the CA-SUTI incidence rate table. So to start, the all UTI events line list provides a list of all the UTI events reported, and each line represents a UTI event entered into NHSN. So as you remember, column 1 is the org ID, column 2 is the residence date, column 3 shows the current date of admission, column 4 is the event ID, and column 5 shows the event date for our events. Column 6 tells us the type of UTI events that you are looking at, either a BUDI, CA-SUTI, or SUTI that have been entered into NHSN by this particular facility. Column 7 shows the catheter status, whether it's in place or neither. And column 8 is the location. So a nursing home can look at this line list and verify the accuracy of the data that had been entered in the past month or in the past year, depending on how they're looking at it. And we can also look at any trends in our data. For example, any UTIs that are clustered in a particular location within a facility. So on to our rate table. So this table shows the overall CA-SUTI incidence rate for this facility by month and year, as we see on column 2. And this table looks at facility-wide data, which allows users to compare the data from one month to another. And each of the lines represents a count and rate for that month and that year. So in this case, just to remind you, so the incident rate means that these are new events reported that month for a particular resident. So as we observe in Lab ID and the Lab ID data, the location, column 1, is also fact-wide in for UTI data. Column 3 shows the catheter-associated UTI count. Column 4 shows the catheter days. Column 5 is the CA-SUTI rate, and that's calculated by dividing the CA-SUTI count on column 3 to the number of catheter days on column 4, multiplied by 1,000 resident catheter days. Column 6 shows the number of resident days, and column 7, the catheter utilization ratio. So now we're going to be moving on the process measures analysis output options. So this is the third folder that we see in our main analysis page. And if we click on that, we'll see, we'll click on process measures, and we'll see the specific process measures. And here we see there are 3 different options. We have line listing for all process measures, and 2 rate tables, one for hand hygiene adherence, and the other for gown and glove use adherence. So first I'll discuss the all process measures line list. And this is aggregate data by month for hand hygiene performed and indicated, and gown and glove use performed and indicated. And if you remember, Angela mentioned that a facility can choose to do one or the other or both, and in our example, this facility is doing both. So you can use this particular table to take a snapshot by month and year of how your facility is doing in terms of the hand hygiene performed. And our next table is the rate table for the hand hygiene adherence. And this is, so we have a separate, the glove and gown use is looked at on a separate table. This particular rate table is looking at the hand hygiene adherence. So here we see it is also summarized by year and month. Column 1 shows it's also by facility-wide, is how this data is summarized. Column 3 and 4 shows the hand hygiene performed, and column 4 is indicated, and column 5 is your adherence rates per month. So I know we went through this a little quickly, and that's because, but at the same time, I just want to also encourage everyone to, if you want to go into NHSN and look around for yourself, and feel free to send us any questions that you have. We have a lot of resources and a lot of ways of visualizing the data. And I think personally, one of the ways of looking at, the best ways of being able to look through it is to go through the tables for yourself, see if they make sense to you, and send us any questions you may have regarding these data outputs. And I'd like to leave you all with some general tips for analyzing data in NHSN. First is to develop a timeline to regularly analyze facility data entered into NHSN. And we strongly recommend to consider a frequency that would allow timely feedback and intervention if necessary. This could be monthly review of rates and event level details. And a reminder again to generate data sets regularly, as I mentioned before. Read the footnotes on each of your reports, because again, this tells you what data is contained in your tables, what data are included or excluded, and also review the data for accuracy and completeness. You've seen this before. This is what Angela was mentioning. I just want to point out for questions, this is NHSN at cdc.gov for any questions you may have regarding the analysis tables. Thank you. Questions?
Hello. Thank you for that, Elisabeth. I'm Jamie Moran from Seattle, Washington. Quick question. Currently, for long-term care, is there any benchmarkable or other data that can be compared? Pooled means, pooled rates, anything like that available now?
I'll start, and I'll probably turn to Namali. Right now, we have the rates tables that you could look at currently, but we don't have enough data yet for like a large scale comparison or any benchmarking currently, because I think right now, as Namali probably showed, we have maybe 200 facilities that are actively reporting. So once we have more data into the system, then we'll be able to create benchmarks and we'll be able to do the comparisons that you are mentioning.
Do you have an ETA on when that might happen?
ETA?
So the question is about benchmarking and when we'll have that. So, you know, many of you are involved in the CDI reporting program, right? That CMS is implementing through the scope of work for nursing homes. And one of the additional benefits of that project will be, we will have a large cohort of nursing homes submitting data consistently for multiple months and multiple years. So it's our intention to use that data as it comes in. And of course, our summary reports and analyses are done on the calendar year. So it may take through 2017 for us to really, with confidence, provide those kinds of facility-level risk-adjusted data. And our goal, of course, is to eventually get to a place where we're creating SIRs. But remember, even with a couple of thousand nursing homes, that's still a very small proportion of the total field. So we have to also be mindful of our interpretation. The groups of facilities that are taking advantage of and engaging in this opportunity to report may not represent the whole world of nursing homes out there.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, in the back.
Yeah, hi. Very nice talk. Thank you. I did want to ask a couple questions. One relates to the process measures, and particularly as it relates to gowning and gloving in nursing home facilities. I'm assuming that you are getting some information about transmission-based precautions from the annual survey, and then you are looking to potentially group nursing homes together that have the same practices, because to my knowledge, there is no standardization about what is exactly happening as it relates to transmission-based precautions in nursing homes. And as a follow-up, I did want to ask, since UTI is the healthcare-associated infection that is being monitored, has there been any thought about including process measures associated with management of catheters in the nursing home facility? I did note that you do mention about changing catheters that have been in place greater than 14 days before obtaining a urinary specimen, and to my knowledge, I don't think that's a universal practice in nursing homes. I might be mistaken, but I just thought I'd ask those questions about how you're gleaning this information about practices.
So remember that this is a tool for internal quality improvement, and that was originally the intent, right? That we're creating a system that is going to support the prevention activities in a facility by giving them data for action. And I look at the prevention process measures entirely through that lens, that this is a way for a facility to systematically capture the adherence to best practice at the bedside for both hand hygiene and for gown and glove use. Our analysis of that information, we can certainly look at what is reported in the annual facility surveys and ask the question, is there a rationale for segregating and summarizing some facilities one way and other facilities a different way up front? Sort of, I don't know that that would be the appropriate thing to do. I think you have to ask the question, why are you having facilities use this reporting option? And to me, the goal is so that as a nursing home provider, I have a systematic approach to tracking and being able to then feed that information back to my frontline staff of how they're doing by unit, or throughout the facility on this particular performance practice. You asked about whether we will incorporate process measures into other event reporting. Elisabeth talked about the antibiotic starts for urinary tract infection and how we're tracking not just the antibiotic starts for those events that are meeting criteria, but all antibiotic starts, correct? So we recognize that there may be a lot more clinically treated UTIs than events that meet the surveillance criteria, and that might be because of documentation. There may be many reasons for that. This is really a process measure at the end of the month to look at how many events are we treating with antibiotics compared to how many events are we identifying as events that meet the definition. And that disconnect may highlight opportunities for us to look at our antibiotic use and provide us with a target to perhaps make that discrepancy smaller. We have learned from an experience that that a group of providers involved in a county prevention project, that's a national project funded by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, or AHRQ, and they worked very closely with the HRET, which is this is the research arm of the American Hospital Association, and forgive me for not being able to articulate their acronym right off the top of my head, but many of you may be aware of this project. It was a large county prevention program that included education, surveillance, and information about stewardship. One of their process measures in that project was looking at total urine cultures submitted per month, and also tracking or associating that with UTI events that met definitions, symptomatic catheter-associated UTI events. We know that the more testing that's done, often the more positive tests we will see, and that can become a driver for antibiotic starts. So we have explored, based on the experience they have shared with us, whether that will be an eventual process measure also included in the UTI event reporting. So we are open to integrating process measures into our event reports as it makes sense to do so.
Hi, I'm Laura B. I'm from Telegen, Queen and QIO. I just would like to ask if there is any chance that there will be a training site for nursing homes to enter data, as well as to try and print out some of those analysis data sets that we've just discussed a while ago? Because that would be a great opportunity for nursing homes to practice entering data as well as printing out those analysis data sets.
So so I can think of two different things you could do. On the NHSN website, there is the demo page, and if I can, I don't know if you've ever been to the demo site. So that's a site where you can click on that site and you have a temporary access to NHSN, and there's data already there for practicing analysis if you need to, but you can also enter data if you needed to practice on how to enter data. So, and that's on our demo site. External users can come in, register, and they have access for about 24 hours with the option of extending that access for longer.
And that's the best. And the NHSN demo site is the best environment for people who are interested in learning more about the application or experiencing the environment of the application to get a feel for it. Right. And as Elisabeth mentioned, there is some existing data, so you can do some analytical practice, and you can also learn how to submit and see the data elements for event reporting and in that application as well.